The world of ocean freight shipping and particularly ocean freight trades is complex and complicated. There is always someone who is distressed or dissatisfied with the freight rate situation, and rightfully so. Prior to 2020, many of the carriers were in distress. Some collapsed, some were on the verge of collapse, and some were rescued by governments. And since 2020, most of the same carriers have seen a windfall of profits in recent years, with the net income for 2022 expected to reach $256 billion. And that is topping 2021's record by about 73%. And now it's the turn of exporters, importers, and other related parties, including the President of the United States, to be distressed about the high ocean freight rates. Now, when we speak about ocean freight rates, there are two main types, spot and contract. A lot of the clients are unsure of which rates to follow, spot or contract, and which is the lesser of the two evils. To understand how things work in the world of freight rates and how it impacts our lives, we at Shipping and Freight Resource and Charlie PESTI have put together a stellar panel of experts. I'm Hariesh Manaadiar, the founder of Shipping and Freight Resource, the definitive online resource for shipping and freight information, and also the director for data and marketing intelligence with Charlie PESTI, the world's best publicist for shipping and freight industry. I'm joined today by three industry experts. John McCown, he's the CEO and founder of Blue Alpha Capital. And to those who might not know, he's one of the few who had the privilege of working with and being mentored by the father of containerization, Malcolm McLean. Welcome, John. And we have also Shabsie Levy, CEO and founder of Shifl, Shifl.capital, and Shifx, one of the main container spot freight rate indices based on actual shipments. Welcome, Shabsie. And we also have Steve Nothdurft, who's the VP of Sales for North America with MOL Consolidation Service. And Steve knows something about the carrier business, having been recently with a carrier, and he knows a lot about how the freight rate works. So, gentlemen, as per the industry information, contract rates have been increasing, and as of August 2022, it is said to be 120% higher than last year. While that is for the contract rates, spot rates, on the other hand, went up by 373% in September 21 compared to 2020. But at the same time, it's currently sitting at 83% less than September 2021, as per the latest data from Shifl. So, John, let me start with you and ask if you could give a simple explanation of the difference between the spot rates and the different types of contracts, please.
Thank you. Pleased to be here. Well, a spot rate really can be defined as the current value of something, an asset or a service that's available for immediate delivery. So in the classic sense, the spot rate is the market value, and the only real difference between that and the contract rate is timing. Okay, this is a slide of monthly values. Going back to late 2019, with the red line. The maroon line is the CTS Global Pricing Index. CTS is data that's provided from the carriers themselves. So I view that as the most refined and absolute measure of actual pricing. This is all loads that move. And then on top of that, the blue line is the SCFI, which is probably the oldest and the most widely followed spot index. While it's just prices out of China, given China is the source of almost half of the containers, it's a pretty relevant measure. And what jumps out at you at the very beginning when you look at that, again, going back to that definition that, spot is really the market and it's just a timing difference. Most contracts in shipping are a year or less. And so what you see, if you had that relationship when a contract comes up it resets at spot, you would see a much tighter, you'd see that gap. You'd see the red line kind of catching up with the blue line, and that just hasn't happened. If you look at the second quarter, and you see on the data, it started to come down in terms of the spot, but the maroon line, that aggregate pricing, that by definition is the spot and the contract.
You heard what John had to say. So what is your view on this? What does spot rate mean to different entities, BCOs, carriers, forwarders? Who stands to gain most with spot rates? Because you are in that, you're the expert in that field.
Right. So I'll echo what John explained. So spot rates is basically an indicator where the market is currently. It's giving us a number at where the market is currently versus fixed rates are, giving a company the ability to stabilize the rates. The unfortunate part is that when it comes to fixed rates, it typically is more of a cap on the upward trend. Versus when the market goes down, the companies using the fixed are able to result to the spot market, or B, renegotiate the fixed contract. So we're seeing, I saw an article today where a lot of the contract rates are being renegotiated currently to match the spot market. So you see the spot market as really being the healthy market driver, the competitive indicator of where the market is currently, and that's what we're seeing now, drastically going down, and it's currently loop-sided where the contract rates are typically higher and being renegotiated. But when we look at the other way around, the rates were going up. That was really on the opposite end. Companies were paying on the spot market in the peak maybe $22,000 going to the East Coast. And at the same time, in the early days when there were still contract rates, we were able to see companies paying $4,000 compared to the same on the same lanes, and that really causes the friction between the two. And the biggest problem is it's not fair for the regular importers, the smaller importers that are not able to benefit off the contract rates, where at times the bigger competitors are going to be paying significantly less. But on the other side, when we're looking at a market like today, the fixed is gonna go down based on the spot market. So that's kind of a little bit of a predicament there. I like to see in the spot market specifically, I mean, there's definitely a lot of ways that the industry can improve and adapt better models. I see the current model as more of a reactive model versus a proactive model. I like to think of it as a seesaw where it needs a lot of work to settle in the equilibrium. It's going to be on one side or on the other side. So the current spot market is a very big downward pressure, and in the peak it had a very big upward pressure. It's never in the center. Model where we
Steve, what do you think from being as a carrier? Do you think spot market rate is preferred by the carriers because they can increase prices at their whims and fancies, or is it just related to they prefer contract rates more?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of predictability that the carriers deeply want to have as it relates to contract rates, Hariesh. But I think the carriers have demonstrated a desire to aggressively pursue pricing mechanisms that are going to generate the best revenue streams while maintaining some essential volume levels. And while I suspect this has always been the case, as we've seen pricing pressure during limited peak periods in the past, where the normal holiday rush or a pre-Chinese New Year, as an example, we would see those types of peaks and changes in pricing. But it's certainly been visible over the past 2 years. And the liner operators have certainly toggled between the spot and the fixed markets in order to, of course, benefit, I think, financially to their better end. I think if we want to be transparent on the topic, since the outbreak of COVID, contract rates have become somewhat meaningless. Initially, they were worthless because the spot was soaring well beyond contractual terms. Cargo was competing against other cargo for space and equipment at that time. So now the contract rates, however, have become less significant because of the plummeting spot rate and the moves, that is starting to move more and more of the cargo. So it's interesting that within the past 2 years, spot rates have played decidedly different roles relative to fixed contract rates, and in some ways have kind of pushed the contract aside, or maybe the contract is being more viewed as a benchmark, but yet the spot has been driving the market either up or down, and we've seen that as the case. I think, in the end, carriers are going to have to come up with their own methodology. Is it better to have a 60% load factor at a $10,000 box rate, or running at 90% with a $6,000 per rate can? I think that's really in the hands of each individual carrier, and that's why you see a lot of the gyrations and activities in the spot rates currently.
Great points there. John, circling back to your explanation about what a spot rate is, and also based on what Steve and Shabsie mentioned just now, where do you see the prevalence and credibility of spot rates currently?
Well, I see the prevalence of spot rates is much lower than most people think, or the way they act. And quite frankly, I see the credibility of those rates lower. And this really comes from looking at the factual data and taking the CTS index and other measures of aggregate pricing and comparing that to the spot rate. All the data has to fit together. I mean, the sum has to be equal to all of the parts. And so that's where a lot of my observations and analysis kind of come from. I've said that spot rates are as little as 10% of all rates. That, again, is probably a little on the low side, but the higher up you go, again, in that mathematical solving for the difference between the CTS global and the spot, you get to a point when you push up spot rates to levels that some people just assume they are. It's certainly not 40 or 50%, because then you get to a situation where your contract rates haven't really moved a lot, and the gap between contract and spot. I mean, I fundamentally see them as two. 10 years ago, when I went to Shanghai, I went to the Shanghai Shipping Exchange and met with them for a couple of hours and wanted to understand how they get the rate. And it's largely kind of a survey on Friday afternoon where they call intermediaries, and that's their professional view of what a rate would go, but it's not necessarily a real transaction. And most importantly, it's not all that kind of moved by spot. So it's a bit more of a.
So Steve, as you can hear, John is not very convinced about the credibility of the spot rates, although he mentioned that spot rates are prevalent, but not as much as everyone thinks it is. From your experiences working as a carrier, what do you think drives pricing in the container sector? What is the key?
Well, Hariesh, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have just pointed to Adam Smith's invisible hand. While the basics of supply and demand, I think, are always going to remain critical to the pricing fundamentals for the carriers, the pandemic created new factors that dramatically swayed the conditions of ocean freight. I mean, if we start just with COVID itself and its ability to turn so many things upside down, from warehousing to buying patterns and right on down the line, and things like its flash effect, particularly in China, and their lockdowns, and then the impact of what that had to the overall pipeline, that created so many struggles that in turn impacted the carrier pricing to the market. And then if you just think of the crazy things that we never could have imagined before, like ships being wedged in canals, the unbridled purchasing that caused the supply chain to kind of throw up on itself, the gross imbalance of equipment, if you take a look at, with the amount of imports that were flooding the market, these wild card, I would call them, factors that we've seen over the past 2 years, they've really been driving, kind of this diversity in price in the ocean sector. So as we come out of the pandemic, I think there's still a way to go on in normalcy, you might say. We've got a lot of issues on the land side, particularly here in North America. whether it's operations at the ports, whether it's rail terminals, frankly, whether it's customers, importers still sitting on containers and chassis, right on down the line. I think that, these things are going to malinger and stay with us for many more months to come. And when you ask what are those impacts on pricing, I think they're going to play a role as we continue to move down the line. But I think perhaps by this time next year, we're probably going to see a return to more traditional pricing models by the ocean carriers. And perhaps Mr. Smith's hand will once again become more of the guide.
Obviously, in terms of that, there is a very important narrative happening at the highest level, including the White House. And that is, John, the correlation between freight rates and the US inflation. How do you see this? And do you think, we all, or we have been told that the inflation went up because of freight rates. But so now that the rates are coming down, do you think it will help in controlling the inflation, John?
Well, again, when you say rates are coming down, you're talking about spot rates, which are, even if the spot rate is, how should we say, indicative of the market. And I guess the other point that I would make, there have been, over the past few weeks, there have been a number of articles where people have said, well, spot rates are now below contract rates. Again, I get back to anecdotally, I'm sure that's true. People can point to examples. But if you look at it mathematically, based on the data, the SCFI, even with the 10% drop last week, is still 219% what it was second quarter of 2020. That's higher than the CTS index of 184%, and the CTS index includes that. So you kind of go through the math, and the math based on the actual averages simply doesn't support what people are saying, that spot rates are already below. Now, some people might be saying, well, that line's going down, so I know it's going to be lower. And I want to get back also to my concern about the credibility of spot rates. It's everything in the way they're put together. And I think it's an honest attempt, but it is a whole bunch of people are called and asked for their view of what it will cost. And again, that doesn't always represent a real transaction. Where there's a real concern, it might be you might have surveyed 40 people. All of those might have been getting their pricing from the same line that week. So I just it's information, and it's a bright shiny object, and everybody looks at it. But it certainly, the math, and I think it becomes clear when you look at the earnings, that math isn't followed through. The third quarter is going to be a darn good quarter for the container shipping industry, even with the breathless point. So to get back to your point, yes, it's a very significant impact on inflation by data. But those days are over. And I guess what it comes back to, you even said it, narrative. There's a lot of narratives in the shipping industry, but narrative, when it comes to an economic decision, narrative does not beat analysis, and you got a lot.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I like what you said about the freight indices. Shabsie, you run Shifx, which is a spot freight rate index, and funny enough, while the spot rate index is showing a very steep drop, the volumes keep increasing, at least in the US. How does that tie in? Generally it should be the other way around. If the volumes are going up, so should the freight rates. But now we are seeing a big drop in the rates, but the volumes are going up. And as John mentioned as well, there's a big difference in indices as well. But from your perspective, why do you think that is? Why those confusing signals?
That's a great question. We have to recognize that the industry is just the way it operates is there's just whatever's happening is affecting the future. It's a ripple effect. What we're seeing right now in the industry is not indicative of what's happening now. It's indicative of orders that companies produced and gave into production months ago. It's indicative of a market months ago. There's still excess cargo moving in orders being produced based on what was happening months ago. So the data that we look at, cargo coming in, that's data of container ships that are arriving now with cargo that was booked and produced a long time ago. And that's the way our industry is. It's reactive, right? We're looking at what's happening now, but this is not indicative of the current market. It's indicative of a market months ago. What is indicative of the current market is the rates, the spot rates. And this means that carriers now are looking out there to fill up their ships. Otherwise, there's no way these rates go down. We keep on getting every day. Like the spot market is an actual market. I mean, it is, if you ask anybody that rides along the spot market, that ships in the spot market, it takes some effort to be up to date with the spot market, but it's an actual market. We know any given point of time, every single carrier's spot rate. If a forwarder knows how to shop around, they'll always be within the $50, $100 range of the spot market. It's an actual market. It keeps on being updated. So I mean, we're looking at a market right now. We've increased capacity. Ports are able to handle a lot more, but it's just the forecasts are not there. We're not seeing so much cargo being in production now for the next upcoming few months. Now, the industry is still backlog, ports still congested, but that's all indicative of months ago. It's not indicative of what's happening right and expensive.
But having said that, Shabsie, and also Steve and John, maybe you can weigh in on this as well. Every spot rate or every freight index is different. So consumers are really at a loss to understand how to read these things, and also if it is actually and practically helping them to understand the difference between spot and contract, or which direction they should go. Because as you mentioned, John, if you look at CCFI, it's different, Shifx is different, XSI is different, FBX is different. Everything, all the freight indices are different. So why do you think that disparity is, Steve? What is your view on that?
Well, I think if you have to start from the premise that these indices are, and Shabsie was, and I think John both alluding to this, they're generally in arrears. So they tend to reflect what is in the past, or let's say at best, the today, when the focus really needs to be on what lies ahead. And I think Shabsie was touching on this, because regardless of whether the rates are rising or falling or neutral, with customers booking 3 to 6 weeks forward, this is really where the action is. So I think this is the real challenge between indices, and then when it comes time to move the cargo, what am I going to be paying? And where is the market at that point in time? So this is it's a futures game, and it's something that I think certainly if customers are playing in the spot market, this is a challenge that they face, and a roll of the dice, if you will, in terms of where they'll wind up from a numbers perspective.
So in the second quarter, the SCFI was up 372%, and the Brewery World Composite Index was up 376%, both versus 2 years earlier. And it's not surprising that there's a correlation. I mean, I guess there's a multi-collinearity of the data.
Indices. But my question is, John, do they really help the customers in being able to decide in which direction to go?
Well, I think, again, there's an information content in that. I'm sure that all the salesmen of all the carriers, when they're renegotiating, they're showing the spot rate that positions them nicely to come to an agreement that makes the customer feel that you're special. I think the missing piece of information, and if I was a shipper, what I would want to know is what is actually occurring, with the aggregate amount of loads moving in that trade lane. And again, I think you get that more with things like the one index, which shows their two big trade lanes, the global index. I think there are a lot of shippers out there that are settling for what they think is a good deal, somewhat on the working assumption that the spot market represents actual pricing of everything. And if there are no changes in the market, that's what they'll eventually go to. And that is just not the linkage. Again, to me, it gets back to the math. It all has to tie together. And so if I was a shipper, I'd be a big consumer of the spot indexes, but I would do my own analysis similar to what I talked about to try and parse out what's actually happening with contract rates, because that's the real measure, and that's it's really two almost completely separate.
In the recent past, obviously, everybody has been bashing the carriers for the profits that they've been making. But am I wrong in saying that they are not alone in this? I mean, not just the carriers are making money. Everybody associated with it is making money because it's a symbiotic relationship. I mean, freight forwarders, I'm sure, are also making a lot more money than they used to. Transporters are making money. Warehouses are making money because there's no space. So, of course, there must be a big difference in the quantum, but I don't think it is just the carriers that are making money. The entire market is making money. What do you think, Steve?
I think certainly early on in the pandemic, Hariesh, if you looked at just Wall Street results from, and we can pick some names, but Home Depot, a lot of the big box type people, the initial, at least here in America, stay home syndrome and fix your house and whatnot was very, very favorable to the retailers. And they all made a lot of money, notwithstanding that they were paying rates, spot rates, above their contract rates at that time, in many cases, to get cargo moved. So to your point, everybody did benefit. And if the ocean carriers were making money, certainly those people in the OTI, 3PL, NVO market that are operating on a cost plus model, they were making more money too. So to your point, everyone, perhaps except at least here in America, the consumer, has benefited from the activities in the ocean market, and not just ocean. We should look at the air. That has also been up in terms of returns for air carriers. Trucking companies have been also very, very profitable during this time, and certainly the railroads continue to steam ahead from a financial perspective. So, yeah, it's not all just the carriers making money. Yeah. That is the headline, mind you, but behind the scenes, everyone else is doing quite well too, it would appear.
How do you see that in the forwarding market, Shabsie? Very quickly, because we've got a couple of questions that you would like to answer.
I mean, to add to Steve, I mean, the consumers are going to be seeing the benefits right now. I mean, there's overstocked inventories. There's going to be a lot of sales for products going out to consumers now. As far as the importers, they were making money when freight rates were going up, but on the downside, they might still keep the pricing up, for a while until they drop it according to the new freight prices. So it's like an ecosystem. Everybody is at some point will be able to. So as far as the forwarding market, it's chaotic. It's never been very transparent, and that's one of the biggest parts where some forwarders might make a lot of money on the drops or in the ups, and especially in the market when there was no space and companies were literally begging forwarders to provide space to them. So definitely was a forwarders market, and just the margins on a $2,000 freight is definitely not the same as the margins on a $10,000, $20,000 freight. So I mean, it was definitely an interesting journey throughout the past few years. How things will stabilize in the upcoming years, so remains to be seen. And I mean, it's definitely going to require a lot of work from all parties to bring the industry to a more stable environment.
Sure. Well, it seems that the laws of gravity works on freight rates as well, because whatever goes up must come down, and right now it is coming, even though John is a bit cautious about that, but we knew this. And but the concern for all currently is the velocity of the decline, and if such rapid increases or decreases are healthy to business, of course. So, but we will all be watching what happens to the freight markets in the coming months, as we all discussed. So maybe each of you can take half a minute to give a closing comment. Steve, maybe you can
sure.
Say what your closing comments are.
Yeah, I think there's, as I had previously mentioned, there's still factors in the market that are going to keep things a little bit crazy. There's probably more cargo moving because we have fewer operational voids. The system is starting to repair itself, and I think those are very positive signs. It's unfortunate reading today, though, some of the scenarios that may be developing on the West Coast from a labor perspective. That flare-up has not been factored into the equation for a lot of people. We've kind of just taken it at face value based on conversations back in May that it was going to get tackled quickly, or it was going to be tackled peacefully. Now we're starting to see that may not be the case. So hopefully by this time next year, we're operating where schedules are more reliable. where the product is more practical from the carrier's perspective and frankly from the buyer's perspective. I think it was John that mentioned people are not getting a quality product. So I think that's what we have to look forward to. Where the price lands is going to have a lot to do with carriers' ability to show restraint.
And Shabsie, from your side, what should the people look for?
I mean, unfortunately, we learned the hard way. COVID had to come by to show us the instability of the industry. It was not stable for a very long time prior, but something like COVID was able to throw it really out of proportion. So there's a lot we've learned from COVID, and there's a lot we can do to kind of improve the industry and make it more stable. The FMC now has more regulating power. I think they'll be looking at a lot of different factors and how do we avoid this from happening again. I think personally, we have to make a big push for the industry being proactive instead of reactive. It's run in a very reactive manner right now. A lot can be done to incentivize companies to book ahead of time, book according to their production. But at the same time, carriers will need to step up and make rates more transparent. And this last minute GRI model, we don't find that in any other industry. It's like, I can agree to buy a product at the seller's discretion to change the price based on how busy it is. And that's not a model we've seen in any other industry. So it kind of causes the high profits because it incentivizes carriers, but at the same time has the opposite effect. So we need to have incentives for carriers to give pricing months out, for companies to be able to know this is my price, it's not going to change, and to plan their production. Not all cargo has to come in during the busy season. It makes sense to plan it, but if you know you're getting a better price in the off season, now you're shifting cargo to different times.
Well said, well said. John, your closing remark, please.
Well, if you're a shipper, my strong advice is do your own analysis, dig into the numbers. If a carrier salesman comes and is showing you spot rates and inquire what's happening with the actual contracts in that lane, try to understand where the rate they're offering you, which might seem to be quite attractive relative to spot, how does that compare versus the aggregate amount of loads they're moving? Try and dig in, and there are numbers out there. There are numbers out there that allow a shipper that wants to look into it to break past the purposeful opaqueness in carrier pricing. Okay. So do the math.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for a very, very insightful discussion, and to the audience, thank you very much for attending and for the support and all the questions we had. Unfortunately, we did not have the time to take all your questions. We will try and answer that separately, but thank you again. And Shipping and Freight Resource and Charlie PESTI appreciates your time and the knowledge that you have shared today. And enjoy the rest of your day.